The hook is an experience designed to connect your user's problem to your solution with enough frequency to form a habit. And it's through successive cycles through these hooks that our tastes are changed, that our preferences are formed, and that these habits take hold. So let me briefly introduce you to this hook model. Hooks have 4 parts, and we find these hooks in all sorts of habit-forming experiences, both online and offline. Every hook starts with a trigger. A trigger is a prompt to action. It tells the user what to do next. It prompts the habit. And we have 2 types of triggers. We have our external triggers, and we have our internal triggers. External triggers you'll be very familiar with. These are things that tell us what to do next with some piece of information inside the trigger. So click here, buy now, play this, a friend telling you about an app through word of mouth, all examples of external triggers. But the information for what to do next is not informed by information in the trigger itself, but instead is informed through an association in the user's mind. So what we do in response to being in a certain place, a certain situation, a certain routine, around certain people, and most frequently when we experience particular emotions, dictates what we do next, prompts the action for these behaviors that we do with little or no conscious thought. Next step of the hook is the action phase. The action phase is defined as the simplest behavior done in anticipation of a reward. The simplest behavior done in anticipation of reward. Let me show you some examples of a few habit-forming products, and I want you to see just how simple these actions are. So something as simple as scrolling on Pinterest, or searching on Google, or what could be easier than pushing the play button on YouTube. Turns out that there's a formula to predict these singular behaviors, these singular actions. It comes to us from a researcher by the name of B.J. Fogg, who tells us that for any human behavior, we need 3 things. We need sufficient motivation, sufficient ability, and a trigger must be present. So for any human behavior, sufficient motivation, ability is how easy or difficult something is to do, and a trigger must be present. The next step of the hook is the reward phase. The reward is where the user's itch is scratched, where they get what they came for. Where they get what they came for. When we talk about reward, we have to start in the brain. And in particular, an area of the brain called the nucleus accumbens. The nucleus accumbens does not stimulate pleasure per se, but instead activates what we call the stress of desire. This wanting, this craving reflex, because it turns out the nucleus accumbens is most active in anticipation of a reward. But when we actually get the thing we want, the thing that's going to make us happy and finally going to make us feel good, that's when the nucleus accumbens becomes less active. And it turns out that in all sorts of products that we find most habit-forming, you will find this element of variability, because the unknown is fascinating. And variability causes us to increase focus, increase engagement, and it's highly habit-forming. Which brings me to the last step of the hook, the investment phase. The investment phase is where the user puts something into the product in anticipation of a future benefit. It's not about immediate gratification. That's what the action phase is for. The investment phase is something the user does for a future benefit. It's some kind of investment, some kind of effort into the product, and it increases the likelihood of the next pass through the hook in 2 ways. The first way that investments increase the likelihood of the next pass through the hook is by loading the next trigger. Loading the next trigger. So for example, when I send someone a message on WhatsApp, I don't get any kind of immediate gratification, right? I don't get any points, I don't get any badges, nothing really happens when I send someone a message. But what I'm doing when I do that, when I invest in the platform by taking my time to send someone a message, what I'm doing is loading the next trigger because I'm going to get a reply. And that reply comes bundled with, what's that an example of? An external trigger, prompting me to go back through the hook once again. The next way that investments increase the likelihood of the next pass through the hook is by storing value. And storing value is a big deal. One of the reasons I love working in the technology industry is because unlike things in the physical world, these chairs, this lectern, and these phones, your laptops, everything in the physical world depreciates with wear and tear, right? The more we use them, the less they're worth. But habit-forming technologies should do the opposite. Habit-forming technologies should get better with use. They should appreciate with value. And they do this because of the principle of stored value. So that's it. The 4 steps of the hook model, the trigger, action, reward, and investment, and through successive cycles, this is how customer preferences are changed, how tastes are formed, and how these habits take hold.